Right. We are into our last session tonight, session 10. And as I mentioned last week, we are going to talk about discipling. So where do we go from here? We are going to harvest. And as we harvest, we're going to make disciples of all nations as Jesus commanded us to do. So this means that after we have brought someone to a point where they say, yes, I would like to receive Jesus Christ, and we see them, enter the kingdom of God and rejoice. Many people just leave it there. We are not stopped simply because someone has prayed to receive Christ and is saved. Conversion is not what we are asked to do. Discipling is the command of Jesus. So we need to disciple them. This means to make them followers of Jesus Christ. This is to make them obey Jesus. Yeah, teaching them, as the commission says, and teaching them to obey all that Jesus has commanded us to do. Now, the first thing to do then is in obeying the commands of Jesus. The first step would be baptism, because Jesus says, go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So this is a crucial first step for all who come to Christ. And after that, the next thing we want to do is to slowly and surely teach them to read the Bible, to have disciplines of a Christian, such as praying, fasting, tithing, and so on. But very often in the ministry to international students, we don't have the luxury of time. And we don't have the time to really make them into established disciples of Jesus before they go home or before they leave university and go to a part of Canada that we have never been to, or a part of the world that we cannot even reach. So if we can, at least what we can do is to teach them the theory of discipleship. Yeah, there is the theory and then there is the practice, as in all things. So the theory of discipleship, I do a 10 session with those who have time, and there are books you can give them if there is no time. The theory is taught, but many of the disciplines of a disciple are caught rather than taught. In other words, they watch you do it and they follow you, just like parenting. Many of the things I can say that my daughter has learned over the years, most of the things are really surprisingly, right? Things I didn't teach, at least not verbally, but she follows the example of me and my wife as we go about our ways, living our lives and living it for Jesus Christ. So the theory and then the practice if we can. And of course, one of the most effective ways of discipling is actually to disciple in community. So Bonhoeffer, for example, got his disciples together and they went, to live together in a place where they form a little community. And this they did until the war stopped them. Now, many of us don't have the luxury of being able to disciple in community. We don't have a place where our disciples can eat, sleep, and dream nothing but Jesus Christ and reading the Bible and praying. Now, the other part of follow-up, okay, is that besides making sure our students become disciples of Jesus Christ, or at least they have the basic tools to become disciples of Jesus Christ. Students come to Canada Some of them stay for 5 years, some stay for longer, some stay for weeks, some stay for months. But whatever the time they spend in Canada, very often they, when they first come, they have culture shock. That means they get overwhelmed by living in Canada, the different ways to speak, the different things to do, the different customs and etiquette, what is right and what is wrong is different in different cultures. And so they were shocked and then they adjusted. Now, many don't realize that when they go back home to their own home country, they will get a culture shock again because they have adjusted to Canada, they have learned to live like Canadians, and even if they are not very Canadian when they leave, they would still be far more Canadian than their families or their friends back home accept. So I remember when I went for high school exchange in Oregon when I was 17, and we had 7 of us from Singapore, and we had this deliberate policy of, we adjusted to America. We took on the accent because we've discovered that the best way to have our friends understand us was to speak like them. So we had picked up American accents. But when we were preparing to go back home to Singapore, I'm in Singapore, so come back home to Singapore, we spent a couple of weeks together trying to change our accents back to a Singapore accent. So we tried very hard and we thought we succeeded. Well, anyway, it was a surprise when we got back home and our friends said, "Oh, you have such a strong American accent," even though we had actually thought we had changed back to a Singapore accent. Now, other than that, it's not just the accent. Even for a year, I had been away for a year, my friends and I have been away for 1 year. We have different experiences in that 1 year and we don't have common memories anymore. One thing about friendship is that we have common memories. We've gone through thick and thin together and we have struggled together. We have faced challenges together. We've solved them together. And so we have a bonding that, it's part of friendship and comradeship. But for 1 year, we have lived different lives. We have different experiences, different memories, and there are parts of our lives that we cannot catch up anymore. So there is that sense of loss that you come home and your friends are not quite as friendly as they used to be or as much as you remember. And in a place like Singapore and many, many cities in Asia, the big cities at least, things change very fast. In 1 year, new roads open up, new buildings come up, and new policies of government, new whatever, everything is new. And so you come back, you're 1 year away, you're 4 years away, and you are a total stranger in your home country. In my case, when I came back after my PhD, I spent 5 years overseas doing my master's and my PhD. And when I came back, the shock I had was, well, at least in fast-paced Singapore, there was a whole new subway system put in place in the 5 years I was away. When I left, there wasn't any subway system. When I came back, there was a whole new subway station with a subway system with 42 stations. And I remember taking the train to where I used to work and got out of the station. For those who know Singapore, Raffles Place Station. Raffles Place was where I had worked for many, many years. And I came out of the station and I thought I had got out of the wrong station because I couldn't recognize Raffles Place at all, the place that I had been working for many, many years. So things are new, people are new, They're not used to your accent. And so there's a reverse culture shock. You get shocked that people are not able to understand you. People are not able to, you're not able to explain why you're different because you don't think you're different, but they say you are different. So sometimes with culture shock comes this sense of lostness, right? You are lost because home was supposed to be home, but it's not home. So I think it's very important for us to prepare our students to return home to that kind of situation. At least when you mentally prepare them, they are ready for it and not be totally shocked. So reverse culture shock is what we have to prepare them for. And of course, now they're going home as Christians, and that's very different from when they left. So now you have to teach them how to be a Christian, and especially in countries where there are not many Christians, and they may be the only one in the family or the only one in the workplace. And so you need to teach them how to be winsome disciples of Jesus in a place where they may not be well understood, where they may even be ostracized and worse, persecuted. So returnee preparation is a crucial thing. One of the things that we should try to do is, of course, to connect our students. Sorry for the spelling mistake there. So we need to connect our students with churches and Christians in their homelands. In their homeland, there may not be a church, but maybe there are one or two Christians. If there are churches, good, but you need to make sure that they go to a good church. They go to an evangelical Bible-believing church and not to some cult. So this is very important. We need to help them connect. And if they go back to a country where we have connections, it's good. But if they go back to a country where we have no connections, it might be necessary for the ISM workers to go visit the country and maybe help the students to look for a Christian community to communicate with and to commune with, to connect with. So this is what I do. My wife and I, we can't afford to go every year, but every other year we go to Japan and we arrange for the students to meet us. We go to major cities and we tell them, come and meet together at a certain place. It could be a church, but in a country where there are no churches, well, you may have to say, meet us at the station, meet us at a restaurant somewhere. There was one year I remember we met at a fast food cafe, a fast food restaurant, and one of the local students had managed to reserve a room in this place, and we just told the rest, come to this restaurant and look for this room, and we're all there. Come anytime. We'll be there from this hour to this hour. And of course, when they get together, we make sure they tell us, we catch up with their lives, but we also try and bring them to a local church and introduce them to the local pastor. One of the problems with students going home, even if they don't go back to, even if they go back to countries where there are lots of Christians and churches, they have somehow experienced a different kind of church in Canada, a different kind of worship, singing, a different kind of preaching, perhaps, and maybe even the demographic profile may be different. They have been with young people, they have been speaking English all the time. The Christian language they picked up is English. And then when they go back home, they're Japanese Christians, they're Chinese Christians, they're Indian Christians, and they're just totally lost. They have no idea how to translate the things we taught them into the local language and their local Christian practice. So practices may be different, expectations are different. There may be generation differences. Japanese students, for example, when they go back home, Japanese churches tend to be made up of very old people, and then they're young Christians and they have no fit, no way to fit, and they do not know how to fit. And these generational differences may even extend to the way the older people might expect Christians to look a certain way, behave a certain way, and these Christians who have been converted in Canada, they don't do the same. So the church may be conservative, but younger people, they're used to a worship style where they maybe dance, maybe they wave their hands and lift their hands, things like that. So many changes they have to cope with. And if you don't prepare them for it, they may be totally shocked. One of the things I try to do when I bring Japanese students, for example, when I go to Japan, I try to bring them to an international church. In other countries like Vietnam or China, maybe that's also the solution. They have international churches. Unfortunately, of course, many of these countries also prevent the local people from attending international churches. So some other solution may have to be found in some of these countries. You may actually have to go look for a church to help them look for a church yourself. And in some countries, you may even have to look out for home churches, family worship services where they meet in homes. To do that, of course, it helps that you stay in connection with students who have gone home before that. And if the student has, let's say, a Chinese student has gone back to Beijing and he's got a family church that he goes to in Beijing, you can send your new converts who return to Beijing to the same place, same church. And what I do is, if there are international churches that they can attend, I bring them there, because these international churches would speak English and probably sing the same hymns and worship the same way they are familiar with in Canada. Besides these things, there will be problems with adjusting back to a society that may be faster paced than Montreal, Canada, Toronto, Canada, and maybe they were studying in Windsor, some other smaller town, and the adjustment is just so huge. If they go back to a place like Hong Kong or Taipei, Singapore, or Tokyo. So the pressures of work, the pressures of family, a different social, religious, and political system, they've forgotten sometimes that, the things you do in Canada, you don't do in your home country. And I mean, even small things. I remember a Korean student saying to me after she went back home, she says, in Canada, I go on in Toronto, right? Go on the TTC, we call it in Toronto, the subway. And it's crowded. They hang on to the strap on the train, and then the train jerks and they hit somebody and they say sorry straight away, right? They've learned to say sorry. But in many crowded cities in Asia, in the hometowns, trains are even more crowded, and you just cannot keep on saying sorry to everybody. And this Korean student, going back to Seoul, just Seoul, which is also quite a crowded city, every time she, the train jerks and she knocks into somebody, or the bus jerks and she knocks into somebody, she says sorry, and they stare at her and say, why do you say sorry, things like that, even small things like that. So and even mannerisms that you pick up in Canada, the tastes of food that you pick up in Canada, and you can't get the same food in Korea or Taipei or Hong Kong. and you begin to pine, as just like when I mentioned, when they first come to Canada, the first 100 days is fun, and they have so many new experiences. And when they go back home, the first 100 days again is like getting used again to different food, different ways of socializing, and so on. And work. They might not have worked before, and so now they go back home. And it might be quite a bit of a shock too if they were students in universities that have co-op work or internship, or maybe they have been working part-time, and they think work is a certain way, you do certain things in the workplace, and they go back to the home countries and work is so different. The workplace is so different. And for many um, societies like Canada, like Japan and Korea, maybe even to some extent Taipei and Hong Kong, it's very conformist. It's very, everybody doesn't, everybody tries not to stand out and to do different things or to be different, right? And then it's so different from our workplace in Canada. So lots of changes, lots of pressures, and sometimes it may just affect the mental health because they're so stressed, they just can't cope anymore. And I think I try to tell my students, especially when they're going home for the first time, say, stay in touch. Nowadays, we've got WhatsApp and Line, Kakao Talk, whatever messaging system you have, whatever um, app you have, try and stay in touch. WeChat, whatever it is, stay in touch. And you can call on the phone and hear each other's voices. We have Zoom in places where they can reach Zoom and Google Teams, whatever video conferencing system they have. It's good to just stay in touch and tell them to call. And with a video, you can see their faces and you can see whether they're stressed out or they look okay. And I mentioned this earlier, many converts go back to countries where they will be ostracized or persecuted. And if you know this is going to happen, it will be very important to prepare them for it. Just like Peter and James, the book of Peter and James talks a lot about persecution because the apostles were preparing the disciples for a time when persecution would be the order of the day, and the early church was indeed persecuted in many places. So we fail in our responsibilities. We think, it is done. We have converted them. That's it, move on. We fail if we do not prepare them to become winsome witnesses of God, even if they are not full-blown disciples when they leave. There isn't much time, but at least teach them some basic Christian disciplines and some basic ways to become winsome witnesses of God. So I tell my students, for example, you go back to a non-Christian family, they will think you have deculturalized yourself. You're no longer Chinese or Japanese or Indian. You are, westernized just because you're a Christian. So I tell my students to not throw away their cultures, to be careful that they don't convey the impression that being a Christian means you become a Westerner. It's far from the truth. You must teach them that Christianity is not a Western religion, it's not a white man's religion. It is, in fact, Jesus was a Jew, an Asian. He had brown hair, black hair probably, or brown eyes, and he had a dark skin. So it's not a white man's religion. But the habits they picked up, the worship language, the worship style, all that may actually convey whiteness or Westernness to cultures that are not used to having Christians. So I teach them to stay true to the cultures, celebrate the same festivals, wear the same clothes. And in fact, I tell them of how when I became a Christian, my father said, you are no longer Chinese. And I set out to convince him that I was still Chinese. And one of the things I did was I did not change my name. You see, the thing is, many Western pastors especially will tell you, oh, when you get baptized, you take on a Christian name. And usually it is a Western name. Well, to the home cultures, it is Western, even if your name is very Jewish, like Jacob or Jacob, and even Zechariah or whatever. These are strange names. And so we don't have to insist that they change the names. If they want to, that's fine. And so I kept my Chinese name, and I told so that my father would realize that it's, this so-called Christian name is just a Western name. And when I named my own daughter when she was born, I named her a Chinese name, but it was a Christian name because it was Chinese language, but with a Christian meaning to her name. So this is how we teach them to signal that they are Christians without having to change their cultures. So Chinese New Year, for example, we have these 对联, right? The banners that we put on the doors, and they're in red, and there are, good sounding words on them, like, may all things go well for you. May whatever you do succeed. Yeah, 心想事成, and whatever Chinese phrase you have, if you can put Christian verses, that would be nice too, or words in Chinese that have a Christian meaning, and you retain your culture, but you, in a way, you Christianize it. So this is what I call redeeming your culture, when there are things, perhaps now you don't believe in the God of Fortune, so you won't have a statue of the God of Fortune right outside your house. Many Chinese in Singapore do that. Maybe you don't have a picture of fairies and immortals and whatever it is that Chinese culture has, but you can have other pictures, you can have other words and decorations, so that people don't see you as different. The other thing I give as an example, some of my students would say, when I go back home, all my friends are non-Christian, so can I go with them to the pub? Can I go with them to the places they go, where they drink and they get drunk, where they do things that I would be ashamed of now as a Christian? And I tell them, well, as long as it's not an immoral place, like a brothel or things like that, a pub is fine, because you can actually go to a pub and not get drunk. So you can go with your friends and tell them you don't drink anymore, you're a Christian, you don't want to get drunk, and well, let's go together, and I'll be your designated driver. When you're drunk, I will drive, and then you'll be safe and I will be safe, right? So they continue to have friends, and their friends are non-Christians, because if they don't have non-Christian friends, how are they going to share the gospel? So teaching them to be able to link up with their old friends again. I tell my students, for example, you tell your friends, I'm a Christian now, but I'm still your friend and you're still my friend. Of course, you don't want to be my friend anymore. I cannot stop you. But as long as you're willing to accept me as your friend still, I am your friend. I will go where you need to go. I just won't do some things you do. I don't drink. I don't watch pornography. I don't do things that I used to do with you. Hope you don't mind, but I'll just, be in your company. So these are the things that they must do so that they convince their friends and family that they have not become Western Canadians, Westernized Canadians. Now, one of the other things I emphasize to my Asian students especially is that in Confucian cultures, there is this uh, value of filial piety. You honor your parents, and I share with them my experience of how when I became a Christian, my father said, "You're no longer going to be filial." And I said, "No, Father, I'll be even more filial than ever, because you see, when I become a Christian, I obey God, and God has 10 commandments. The first 4 commandments deal with my relationship with God. But the 5th commandment, the first commandment dealing with relationships in the world with humans, the first command is honor your parents. So now I'm going to be even more filial than I was ever before. And of course, I think it was easy. In my case, I wasn't very much of a filial son, but I became a better son, and my father saw the change. So you can actually be more, in my case, more filial than I ever was before after becoming a Christian. And no parent would dislike that. So I think we can teach our students, when you go back home, you're not going to be with many Christians, but you can be a winsome witness for God. And even if they don't become Christians, your friends and your family, they would like the fact that you are now a Christian. And one more example, one of the things I told my students, there was one particular student who actually said, so I told her, you go back home and you love your father even more than you ever did before. You love your mother ever more than you did before. For the mother, it was easy for her. She says, no problem. I can love my father. My mother, I've always loved her, and I'll love her more. But my father is going to be difficult. Most Asian cultures, fathers are difficult. So I said, well, are there things you can do with your father? And she says, yeah, I could play tennis. So I said, go play tennis with him then. She says, no, I'm not going to. I said, why? She says, well, when I play with him, it's very frustrating. He always wants to win. And so I said, are you a good player? She says, yes, that's why he wants to play with me. But he always wants to win. I cannot stand losing to him. So I said to her, I laughed. I said, well, now you're a Christian. It's okay to lose, right? Just lose to him. Let him win, and he will love playing with you. And then you bond even more, because now you play tennis with him more than you ever did before, and he would appreciate it. So it was really thrilling for me and my wife. One day, she came down to Singapore to visit us, and she says, I have to be back by Tuesday. And we said, why? Well, because on Tuesday, I have a game with my father, a game with tennis with my father. And we were so thrilled that she had put into practice what we had taught her. So we need to teach them how to redeem the cultures and not reject their cultures and traditions. And maybe if you're not familiar with the culture, you're not Japanese, find a Japanese who can. You're not Chinese, find a Chinese who can. And even Chinese, there's so many different kinds. They're from Hong Kong, they're from Singapore, they're from Taipei, Beijing, and even the Beijing Chinese is different from the Guangzhou Chinese, right? So these are the things that you may have to try and help them at least prepare for it, even if you do not know the specific detail of how to prepare them. So prepare them to cope with reverse culture shock. Now, one of the things we can do for returnees is there are many returnee networks in different countries. Some churches have returnee networks. Some countries have got organizations that help returnees. In Japan, there is the JCFN, or you have mission networks like IFES, the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, or OMF, Overseas Missionary Fellowship. And they've got centers in different parts of the world. SIM, my agency, we have got different connections in different parts of the world. So we can always get them ready and say, hey, I know there is an OMF missionary in Tokyo. I want to get you in touch with them. And talking about the missionary in Japan that I link up my students with, one day he was a little upset with me. He says, you send many of my Japanese returnees to the international church, and the Japanese church needs them, you know. And I said, Sensei, in Japan, pastors, you address them as Sensei. So Sensei, Ogawa Sensei, I would love to connect them with Japanese churches, but some of the Japanese churches find it very hard to accept them, and they find it very hard to fit in. So I have no choice. Some places I send them to the international church, some places I send them, and there are returnee churches where students who have come back from the West, UK, US, Australia, Canada, and they have worship, the places where they worship together, returnees from different places. So where I can, and these will be Japanese churches, they would be bilingual sometimes, and so send them back to a bilingual church where they continue to speak English, and they learned some of the religious terms and terminologies in Japanese too. There are former returnees you can link them up with, others from the same city who have gone back first, different missionaries and so on. And keep in touch with them, email, WhatsApp, WeChat, whatever, Facebook, telephone calls, video conferencing, and so on. And if you can afford it, follow-up visits to encourage them and to disciple them. I had a call from one of my students in China to go to his hometown to share the faith with his family members because he didn't know how to do it. I had a request from another student to go to her hometown because now she has a Bible study that she's leading, but she doesn't know how to lead. But the joyful part was to realize that my wife thought that she had found a Bible study group. And she says, no, I started it myself. So when she got back home to her hometown, she was a lonely Christian, and she got together her friends who were not Christians and say, hey, I've become a Christian. And, they all loved her and respected her. And they said, well, Tajie, big sister, if you are a Christian, you're one, we will be one too. And so her Jiemei, her sisters, 8 of them, they all became Christians. And they had a Bible study. And my student called me up and say, hey, SOS, help. I need to know how to lead a Bible study. So we went back there, my wife and I, and we spent 2 weeks with them, teaching them how to do Bible study. So if you can, before they go home, teach them to lead, teach them to serve, teach them how to teach themselves, self-teach, teach them to read the Bible, and tell them where the good websites are and the Bible study tools they can use that are online so that they can do their own Bible reading and teach themselves and answer questions that they do not know how to answer. We're going to sites like godquestions.org. Now, one of the things that we need to be conscious of is that the web, and we all know that, yeah, the web is full of rubbish. There is good stuff, but there's lots of rubbish. And I was stunned one day when one of these Christians who I've been leading in a Bible study came up and said, hey, Sikiat, I've got these notes from this website that I found, and hey, it's very interesting. And he showed it to me, and I got a shock of my life because it was a cult. And I told him, no, just because they have a Bible study website doesn't mean they are Christians. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, in places where they're not welcome as Jehovah's Witnesses, they call themselves the Watchtower Bible Society. And so they have Bible studies too, but it's Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, I just received a letter from them. Actually, yeah, I now I know how they do the outreach. So they actually send a letter to different apartments, even they don't know the occupants, right? And then, but because it's all in French, so I don't know, I don't know a word. I don't understand what they are talking about, right? So I think there's a French group of Jehovah's Witnesses here in Montreal. Yeah, I'm just guessing, you know, they're inviting people to join their Bible study group because I saw one word Bible there. That's the only word I know in the letter.
Yeah. Well, Mormons do that. Jehovah's Witnesses do that. And you know, you may have a new Christian who is very ignorant and innocent, and they think, oh, I want to do Bible study. And then they join one of these groups. Well, one of the things that I do is that if I know they're going back to a place where they're not going to get much Christian teaching, I give them books. Those who love books would be fine. You give them a book on Christian discipleship, perhaps. I give many of my students a life application Bible. You know, it's a Bible in English, and it's a kind of a commentary. It tells them, after you read this passage, think about these questions, think about how to apply it to your life, and these are suggestions. Okay, so you teach them how to use the Bible before they go back home. It's not just a Bible, it's also a commentary, and it's also a kind of a Bible study material. Okay, so teach it to them before they go home. And if you can get bilingual Bibles for them, that's fine too, so they can continue to read the Bible in English and in their own language. And if they have questions on the Bible as they do the Bible study, as I said earlier on, there's this site called gotquestions.org, and it's got lots of questions. And this is an evangelical site. It's quite balanced. It's not denominational. And so it is quite balanced. Yeah? It tries and gives all sides of the question, different views and different church traditions, yeah, Lutheran, Baptist, Charismatic, and so on. And there is this other website, biblia.com and biblegateway.com. Biblegateway.com also has Bibles in different languages, and Biblia has got some materials in different languages too. And this other site, BibleStudyTools.com, where they can use commentaries and Bible dictionaries and all that for free. And if you need more resources for students, IFES is the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. IBCF Canada is part of it. And it's got very good resources for students. And it is also something you can use to look for connections in different parts of the world where there are Christians and churches. You can also go to the Navigator's website. It's called it Life to Life Discipleship. Navigators are very strong in discipling. And so the Navigator's website also has a lot of discipleship materials which you can use and you can ask your students to use. Okay, so just want to take a break here and ask if there are any questions. Come back and okay, so we were talking about discipleship and I was referring you to this site here. I want to just quickly go there and show you the IFES website. This is IFES is a student organization like ISMC. So you've got different resources here. which and the connections for different places in the world. This is what they do, how you can get involved. Blogs here would include things on prayer and discipleship and so on. Okay, so that's the website for IFES, which you can go to. And navigators. Now there is, of course, the ISMC website. You can also go there. And it's also got stories. It's got things that resources which you can use for your ministry. Now this is another website that contains materials for student work. The Association of Christians Ministering Among Internationals, ACME, and ACME does an annual conference every year. So you've got resources. The ACME portal gives you resources. And you've got to be a member, yeah. So you need to sign up. It's not very expensive, and they have a lot of materials for ISM workers. And of course, there is this thing called the Lausanne Movement, and the Lausanne Movement also has got a website for resources. And then this one, Royston will be familiar. This website is from his church, Intentional Discipleship Making Church, and you've got some materials in that website. Okay, now I mentioned earlier on also about Japan Christian Fellowship Network. Now this is the network which you can use for your Japanese students to go home. They have got English and Japanese, of course, version. I'm looking at the English version because that's all I can read. So you can convert this into the Japanese. So about JCFN, who they are, and if your students need follow-up, this is where you can go to, okay? And JCF and all the returning Japanese students, and they have I think an annual donation. Okay, so if you go to the follow-up needed page, I'm going back to Japan, send me information, and that the students will get a kit from the organization, which would include Japanese materials and so on. Yeah, okay, so this is where you can go to for your students who need help, especially the Japanese students. Now, Chinese returnees, here's another good website. If they are Chinese, so the materials about returning ministry and Chinese books and resources, e-books, for example. Okay, so e-books on international student ministry in Canada, in China, and so on. Okay, so there are other Chinese things, materials in there. But this one, it's got a lot of materials for you if you're ministering amongst Chinese students, and you need to know what resources you can use. Okay, and if you need to link up with students in other countries where there are missionaries, you can come to me, of course, or you can come to this website and see where they are and where they are located, so you can get in touch with somebody who may link you up with a church. Okay, all right, so you can contact them and say, hey, I need to know if there's a church in Timbuktu, please let me know who I can talk to. Okay, all right, and I mentioned earlier on, you've got Christianity Explored Ministries. I forgot, I couldn't remember the name, but now I got it. Okay, and if you go to the resources page, We've got Christianity Explored, which is evangelism. Live Explored is also evangelism and discipleship. Discipleship Explored, that's where you can go if you want to have discipleship programs. It's a video program. It's kind of like Alpha, I know, but this is for discipleship. And 8 sessions. And they can actually go through the videos and questions and so on. Okay. So it's got materials for leaders also, if you're a leader. And of course, there is this website called discipleship.org. Yeah. And it is an evangelical website. There are blogs and books, ebooks. These are free ebooks that you can download, disciple making and so on. Some articles from different of their partners, so to speak. What is a disciple? Different articles that you can read for yourself. They're not for discipling, but you can read on how to make a disciple. Okay, so books on discipleship. So it's a very nice website, lots of free materials. All right, okay, discipleship.org. And my favorite publisher, InterVarsity Press. InterVarsity Press, if you just are looking for books, and it's, InterVarsity is of course geared at intellectuals and university students, college students and so on, right? So you can type in here, you say you want discipleship books, you enter, and there you are, discipleship books, essentials. Okay, this book is a good one, Greg Ogden, and so on. Okay, discipleship, different books. Radical Disciples, Disciple, this is John Stott. John Stott's books are always good.
How about OMF? What do they have?
OMF tends to be more missions, and they don't publish too many books, and there are more missions books. So OMF is fine, but yeah, maybe they do have some discipleship books too. So John Stott has a book on the disciple. As I said, I always love John Stott's books. Okay, so different books. These are all IVP in InterVarsity Press. And what I mentioned earlier on, know what you believe, know why you believe. And this one here is an excerpt from this book, Discipleship, and so free download. But it's only just a portion of it, yeah, just to see how the book is. Okay, so that's all I have today. I want to end here and spend the time just answering your questions, and chatting with you. And this is our last session. So if you need to contact me, this is my SIM email. And if you want my personal email, this is the one that's easy to remember. Any questions, ask To, if you cannot remember the other one. Okay, so yeah, questions. If you're too shy to ask, you can also type in your question in the chat.
Sorry, do you mind to show me again your email address? I didn't get a chance to write it down.
Sorry.
Your email
put it in
address.
the chat. I'll put it in the
put it in
chat.
the chat. Okay.
Oh, email. Okay, yeah, my email. Let me.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, put it. Yeah, Belinda can put it in the chat. And in any case, I think what I'll do is, because I've added many slides along the way, I'll send a new set to Belinda, and you can send a PDF to everyone else.
Yeah. Because we
Thanks.
have a WhatsApp group, so that I put it
Yeah.
there so that they won't miss it.
Yeah. Okay. Can. All right.
Yeah, okay, I just sent it on the chat. After second.
Okay. Questions?
Any questions for what we have discussed and learned in the past 10 weeks now, including this one? I want to know if we can get any free Bibles here in Canada.
There is a website. I will give it to you. I used to get Bibles in bulk, so a whole lot of them, and for very cheap. They are paperbacks. There are also free Bibles if you can get in touch with the Gideons. They have changed the name now. I forgot what's the name.
Gideon say, okay.
Yeah, but the Gideon's version is usually not a very easy to read version for students.
Yeah.
They do, I think they might have a new NLT, New
Living Translation?
New Living Translation. Yeah, I think they may have that one. So that one is also, yeah, it's a paraphrase, but it's easy to read. So for new Christians or non-Christians, you can maybe give them that version, which is easy to read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They may eventually going like using the digital one, but it's also good to have a hard copy.
Yeah,
as the first
some people
one.
like hard copies and
Yeah.
some like digital. If there are Christians who are serious about Bible study, actually the version I prefer is the ESV, because the ESV is a very
How about the NIV? Yes, we.
good translation. The NIV is somewhere in between a literal translation and a paraphrase, so it is easy to read, but in some places it inserts too much of the translator's interpretation, which
Because most of churches use that, right? If
most
they,
churches,
yeah.
because it has been the most well-used church Bible and very popular in many churches. It has a lot of good points about it because it's easy to read, it's modern in its syntax. It's not a paraphrase too much. It's more of what is called a dynamic translation. That means they give you the meaning of the words rather than the literal words. The ESV is more literal, and it's a contemporary English version. So because it's a more literal version, I prefer to use it for Bible study. You get a better sense of what the original Greek or the Hebrew says. The NIV sometimes inserts where there are difficult passages, the translators insert their own interpretation.
Yeah.
How about Amplify version?
Amplify is very, very unrecommended. because they try to.
But I like it, sometimes to amplify some words, right?
What they try to do is to say, okay, this one word in Greek has about 5, possible meanings. We'll put 5 words there. But then if you are not a Bible scholar, how are you going to know which word is actually the best translation of that word, So
yeah, but if you want to go deeper and learn more, right, then you can use it as a reference.
Ultimately somebody has to make a decision. What happens is, if you want, you don't read the Greek, but you want to know exactly in the Greek, maybe it has got other nuances. The version I recommend is actually the NET. The NET is the Net Bible. It is originally, originally it was translated for the internet. That's why it's called the Net Bible. But I think nowadays they call it the New English Translation. Yeah, it's also Net. So the Net Bible is actually very good. It gives you notes. So you must read the notes. It tells you the translation note. The translator will say, okay, this Greek word here can mean this, or it can mean that, and we chose this because of this reason. So the translator's choice is explained to you, right? So, for example, many of us, we read John chapter 3:3, right? And we read it as the NIV, okay? So NIV says born again. So because the Greek word itself, let me see, the Greek word itself is anothen, and anothen can also mean born from above. So when Jesus says in John 3:3, I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. The NIV supplies the word born again, but anothen can actually mean born from above. So there's a footnote. ESV also will tell you that. The Net Bible will give you the difference between translating it as born again and born from above. So essentially, I think Jesus would have been speaking Nicodemus in Greek, and they were both scholars, right? I mean, they could speak Greek and Hebrew and all that. So anothen, that's why Nicodemus misunderstood, because he says when he hears anothen, he's thinking, I have to be born from my mother again. But Jesus, when he uses anothen, he's saying born from above. It's spiritual birth. So when you get a translation like the NET, that's good. You can do a bit of Bible study using the NET. The NET notes are very, very rich in, the worth studying, and it's available in the Net version. Let me see. I think let me check what the link is. Okay, meanwhile, any other questions? Okay, so the NET URL is netbible.org, netbible.org. And maybe I want to share screen and show you. Okay, so this is the NET Bible, netbible.org. And let's say, for example, you want to go to John 3, as we said earlier on, John 3 and John 3:3. So the notes here tell you John 3 verse 3, Jesus replied, I tell you the solemn truth, unless a person is born from above. So there's a footnote here, 8. Click it. It says born again or born again. So NET translate, I tell you the solemn truth, unless a person is born from above. So the NET the translator chose to translate it as born from above, but in a note it says can also be translated born again. The Greek word anothen can mean both again and from above, giving rise to Nicodemus's misunderstanding about a second physical birth. And then translation notes, the word anothen has a double meaning, and so it's kind of like a commentary also. Very useful for Bible study. Okay. It's quite fun, right?
Should I stop the recording?
Yeah, okay.